fear makes transparency opaque.
Sometimes we are afraid of fear itself, and that
Yeah.
keeps things in the dark that we can only deal with when we bring them to the light.
If fear is a safety mechanism, I think it's important to ask yourself, what am I trying to protect?
Pick any writer that you love deeply and imagine that person had said, "Oh, I could never be a writer. I couldn't do that."
In a way, fear, when we transmute it and we exalt fear, it turns into courage, right?
Well, what a difference would that have made in your life if that person had never slain that dragon and put forth something that has touched your life deeply?
When the heart's on the scale and the feather's on the other side, what's the most important thing?
Hey, everybody, welcome back. We've taken a bit of a pause. Life happened, stuff happened, and here we are again. Happy to be with my good friend Cody, and we're looking today at fear and faith, and how do those two things inform our life, and how do we kind of come into right relation with wisdom so as to live a life that is more grounded, more centered, and ultimately more in accord with harmonious life principles. Cody, when we got together, we both drew up a nice list of different topics, and this is one from your list that kind of jumped out to both of us. Do you want to say a little bit about what makes this topic feel more alive to you right now?
Yeah, I'd love to. Faith over fear, or fear and faith. This, is kind of a mantra that a good friend of mine kind of planted a seed in my mind. And I love it. I love the alliteration, first of all, but I love the whole groundedness to the mantra itself. Um, Fear and faith, I think, are both ways of knowing, and they almost eclipse each other in some way. So when we feel fear, then we are sometimes absent of faith, and when we feel faith, then sometimes we are absent of fear. And I think that when we are perceiving reality through a lens of fear, this kind of, overshadows our actions, our nervous system in general, how we feel inside of our bodies, the choices that we make in our lives. It can reflect into our relationships, our relationship with ourselves, and likewise with faith. When we perceive the world through a more trusted, open, relational aspect, then we make choices that are grounded in trust, and we make choices that are grounded in openness, and we aren't filled with anxiety or paralysis to make one decision over the next. So I think it's really important topic at the moment, because we all feel a sense of fear in our own ways in regards to external stimulus or internal stimulus, and it can really shape our decisions. And I think that now more than ever, it's important to return back to how we define faith for ourselves. And faith can be kind of a myriad of different definitions, but at the root of it, I think, and we'll cover this, but at the root of it, I think faith is a moving towards trust, and a willingness to move towards a positive reality. And I think that that's super important in this time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'm really excited to jump into this topic together because, I mean, one, this word fear, right? It's so visceral. Like it really, if we just close our eyes and watch our mind for even 1 minute, we're gonna notice a long line of fears and worries and doubts and anxieties. What if I can't pay this bill and then that happens, and if this and that, or this happened a while ago and this might happen, and it just the mind goes on and on and on with these fears. And then the society that we live in, right? Us as world travelers, we've lived outside the bubble. And when you're outside the bubble and you realize the planet is huge, and nature is magnificent, and there has been a history going back longer than we even know of humans having to deal with the situations of the day. But when you're in the bubble and you're in the United States, for example, and the media is just on and on every day, this, that, the other, the next thing, um, it's just, it can be near all consuming for people of just how do you get out of that? How do you breathe? How do you remember that the sun is still shining, the birds are still singing, the sky is still blue? It seems like everything is falling and faster than you can even keep track, but at the same time, keeping one eye on the always true, um, and that element that doesn't change, and that you can go back to Socrates and Plato, and you can go back thousands of years, and they are dealing with similar situations. It's not that we're dealing with something that no one's ever dealt with. On the surface, things are different, but down to the root of it, very similar patterns going back through time. And I think it helps us to have a historical context to somehow ground ourselves in and to question this notion if it arises in us. Wow, we are living the end times. Well, in the time of Jesus, they were also thinking they were living the end times. People have been living the end times probably since the beginning. So, so at the same time, there's a lot of justifications, reasons why, yes, we're afraid because of this, that, the other. At the same time, it's worth questioning if it's getting in the way of us living the life that deep down we feel we really ought to be living. Then it does behoove us to question what are these fears and to remember a bit of what goes beyond the present day. And all the myths point to this too. The entire purpose of the hero's journey in any shape and form and mask and guise is that you go out from the context of day-to-day living and toiling in a situation that's not working, is causing all sorts of anxieties, and you go out and you have a real experience of something beyond that.
Hmm.
You face challenges. The whole idea of the dragon is your fear. That literally, psychologically speaking, killing the dragon is overcoming your fear. And the goal of the dragon is gaining the benefits of when you say, oh, I could never be a writer, then you close a door to a whole life experience. Pick any writer that you love deeply and imagine that person had said, oh, I could never be a writer. I couldn't do that. Well, what a difference would that have made in your life if that person had never slain that dragon and put forth something that has touched your life deeply? And
Hmm.
what is it that's in you that maybe the door is closed now, that by questioning your fears and opening that door, it's not too late. Dante was 35 years old when he started to write the Divine Comedy, you know?
Hmm.
And it's not too late. So this topic is really, really powerful and important. I'm
Hmm.
looking forward to jumping in.
I love what you said of trying to ground yourself in the always, the present, the now, whatever word you want to ascribe that to, because I think that when fear is present, when we're embodied by it, we're generally casting our thought form, in the past or in the future. We're not really grounded in the present. And fear, in a way, has a tendency to distort like time space in a way, which is really fascinating, because we're no longer in the moment. But you said another thing of initiation, essentially, of like, going out of the bubble, of the family unit, of our friend unit, our social unit, whatever it is that we're kind of gestating in moving outwards from it, is fearful. Like, there's fear in that. And I think that these topics, fear and faith, they hold hands, right? In a really weird way. Like they're almost like lovers in a sense, if we're really romanticizing it, because when we are in that initiatic experience and we feel fear, the tool is to transmute it, right? To use it in a way, as the sword, as the shield, so that we can move with faith to slay the dragon of some sort. And so there's a really cool, it's just cool. It's like, when Ram Dass says, like, the mind is a horrible master, but a wonderful servant. And it's like that with fear in some way too, right? It's like, how can we use fear as a tool rather than be, the tool for fear in a sense. So it's really good. I'm curious, Ram, how do you define fear for yourself? Because I think we can all have different definitions of what fear feels like, or the sensation of it, but how do you generally define it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think it was a few years back I started to think about this in a more minute way. Like, to me, fear feels like a big word, and a word to which we have a bit of aversion to, and a word
Mm.
to which we generally, yeah, I want to say it's like it's countable. Like, the things I'm
Mm.
afraid of are sevenfold. Let me tell you, it's this and this. It's such a big word, but I realized, kind of, um, I have a meditation practice that I've been doing now for almost 20 years. And just by just watching my mind, watching, and realizing more and more, you know, how subtle and how small, we use the word fear, it seems like so big. Anxiety is kind of the water that we swim in, you know,
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
seeing anxieties as fears and kind of making this big word small so that I'm not living in as much denial, so that I'm seeing more clearly how much anxiety is present. And it's a little exercise we all could do just in this moment, wherever we are listening. Where's there tension in the body? Well, tension is almost a kind of fear in this kind of thinking, you know? Anxiety is almost constant. You can kind of chart it out like, oh my God, like in this moment, I could notice that, this is a podcast, but the light didn't go on, the tech things that didn't happen.
Uh,
Am I gonna remember what I wanted to say? Am I gonna be
mm.
too wrapped up in my ego and not give space to what is really underneath that wants to come through? I kind of like to see fear not as this big, overarching, kind of monolithic thing, but more as like the sea we swim in. If
Mm.
someone calls our name and we're there. Oh, that's like it's like a kind of a fear response, or the words that we choose. Are we trying to please someone? Are we trying to
Mm.
there's this constant am I okay? It's tied up with like safety and with image and with but I think at the root of it it's safety. Am I safe? Will I be okay? What do I have to do to survive whatever is happening? I don't know. How does it kind of strike you in this moment?
I think that you said it perfectly. I think that at the end of the day, and this is subjective, but at the end of the day, all fear is rooted in death, right? It's like the ultimate safety piece. And it's biological. Like it's so emotional, and I love this kind of image of these waters that we swim in because it is so connected to kind of this astral dimension. If we're looking at it from like a alchemical cosmology, like fear is rooted in the mind, right? But it's also a biological thing. It's really connected to, our cortisol and our adrenaline and all these nervous system responses that were put in place so that we could effectively run from the bear or protect ourselves from whatever threat that was incoming. And so, in a way, fear is how do I effectively keep myself safe? And we don't, thank God, have too many like physical predators that we kind of brush up against. Instead, we have traffic to contend with, and emails, and social media, and news headlines, and all of these other things that we have this biological response to that we interpret um, as this like a safety piece. And so we like fear is in a way like a safety mechanism to help us kind of protect ourselves. And the issue I think is when that becomes too online. Like how do we shift ourselves? This is from like parasympathetic nervous system state to a sympathetic nervous system state, or rather the vice versa. Like if we're so stuck in this sympathetic state, then we can't shift into that kind of rest, digest mode where we're just relaxing. And then that starts to affect, so many of our choices. So I think that, how I would define it is really the safety piece. Is my safety being affected in some way where I'm no longer thinking. I mean, maybe you're thinking logically or emotionally in a positive way, but fear is kind of the orchestrator in the kind of reasoning. Yeah, I think that the safety piece is the biggest definition for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating what you brought up, kind of created this whole like series of images for me. And like one thing I've done for these last years is help out on these different permaculture places, like where I am right now in Sicily. So a lot of times I'm out in the middle of nowhere, out in the country, and you can interact with people in almost any way that you want, and you can realize what level of peace or tranquility or madness and agitation that you're living with. And, it comes up all the time, even just like, all right, putting little seeds in or put the plant in. Is it okay? Is it this? The mind just, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that it necessarily stops, but it's interesting to think like, could we have a society, you know, I do believe we could have one with less fear, but like the whole idea of, what does it look like when we are just more honest about our fears? That leads
Mm.
to hope. Maybe we'll save that for a little bit later in the conversation and we'll jump into a definition of faith. But yeah, where would you start with this word faith? Because for me, it's I don't really have trigger words, but it's one for me, and some people might even look at me and say that for me, for them, I'm a person with some kind of faith, but it's a word that I kind of almost cringe. I like, it puts so many different notions into people's minds, and so I think it could be helpful for each of us to say, what is it for us?
This is such a good. I love this word because it's prickly, right? It's like you say faith, and there's so much baggage tied to it. But, this book really helped me kind of understand and define faith. And the book is Western Esotericism, A Guide for the Perplexed by Wouter J. Henningroff. Um, and he talks about, there's this chapter called Knowledge, and he talks about what oh, there's your light, rationality is, and faith, and kind of the difference between this and this delineation that our culture kind of went through. And historically, faith was never seen as something that was just this blind belief. It was really considered a way of knowing. And that's really different from our modern time period where we need the proof, especially with the advent of the internet and the advancement with language models, and we fact check everything, and we no longer live in a world where we take someone's word for their word, or we allow ourselves to have a deepening relationship with reality through imagination. Now we deepen the relationship with reality through fact, and that kind of dilutes the word faith as something that might be seen as ignorant, or something that might be seen as ill-informed in some way. But really, I think faith, and how the author was describing it in this book, is knowledge without certainty. And that in a Western culture, for us, especially in modernity, we have such a knee-jerk reaction to that, because it's like, well, how can you know something without believing in it? And that's where this kind of word trust comes into it, and openness, and a moving kind of posturing yourself in a direction of faith. And I think that's kind of the objective definition for it, but I think that we all have personal definitions for ourselves. And how I might define it for myself is trying to align myself with the volition of my soul, trying to align myself with the contract that I have signed through my incarnation, and trying to be open to the unfolding of the of my life's path. And I think that that's kind of dependent on my belief in incarnation or reincarnation, or souls in general. Not everyone might vibe with that, but that's kind of kind of the objective definition, and then maybe a subjective definition for myself. But I'm curious how you would define it for yourself, Prom.
Yeah, I guess maybe the best thing I could say is just through a short story form. My father was atheist, so I grew up in a household. My mom had lived in India and was interested in so many spiritual traditions, and my father was very much science and where's the proof and all this kind of stuff. And he didn't really talk about it ever that I remember, but somehow that idea came into me. You need to, have proof. And in a sense, it's like faith only in what is your direct experience. And so that was kind of my entry point. And coming at it from, with my mom, we were hearing about myths about Krishna before I even heard about Christians, So when I got to like kind of this Unitarian Sunday school, I just couldn't. Yeah, old man with a big boat and animals. What are we talking about here? Like, I'm not interested. It was just boring to me.
Uh-huh.
But through time, and especially getting to like 16, and clinging to this kind of science model, um, one way or another, quantum mechanics came into my radar screen, and I just jumped right in. I was listening to all the like Stephen Hawking's and
Mm-hmm.
Carl Sagan that I could find, and 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 here were like the cutting edge scientists and physicists of our age telling us the most magical, mystical uh, things about fundamental reality. And that just
Mm-hmm.
kind of blew the door open to me of, all right, there's more here than meets the eye. And I think that's to all the kind of wisdom traditions, that's a kind of a simple way of putting it. And so my formula has been just to have faith in my own experience, the things that I have experienced personally inside myself, um, that lead me to wonder and to start to seek out some
Mm-hmm.
explanations of
Mm-hmm.
um, what's going on. And I think as far as, yeah, we kind of do we live in a post-fact world where even like, do we have the certainty? Okay, I researched it. Well, how did you research it? Or this website or that, or I went to the library and this book and that book. Like, what do we actually trust? And do, does that lead us to a point where we kind of shift focus and we act how we need to in the world, um, to kind of navigate it? But maybe more like Descartes, we say, like, all right, there could be all kinds of things that are just putting out misinformation, and we may never get to the bottom of it. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
I lean more towards the fact that it's maybe less important that we really know what is real. But if we stick
Mm-hmm.
to what is functional and don't get too swept away one way or the other, and take for real our own inner experience, I think this is something that is maybe one of my main kind of, um, not to say objections, but where I see science is, for me, cannot be the only tool that I use in my life, because it
Mm-hmm.
just cannot explain to me experiences that I have inside that are as real as anything else in
Mm-hmm.
experience, but that no one else has access to. You had a dream last night, I had a dream last night. It doesn't matter that no one can know exactly how it was, how we experienced it. It's as real as anything else to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important distinction, especially when we get into, how is this functional? How is this functional in the world? If we see a world is very dysfunctional, people are on antidepressants, people are generally not as in love with their life as they perhaps could be, um, it behooves us to start asking some questions. And I think there are some movements towards trends and people looking for some kind of a tradition again, looking for some kind of um, guidance that doesn't come from a peer-reviewed article, but comes from people gathering in the wisdom of their lived experience and saying, this is real for me. Does this resonate with you?
Mm.
So yeah, faith for me is something that's deeply personal, and it's what's been experienced first. And the things that I haven't experienced that other people tell me, I don't disbelieve it, but I don't believe it either. I just say I don't know about that, but my life has showed me that with time, more and more things come into my experience. I just try to stay open.
I love that. I think that's such a big kind of word that kind of keeps showing up when you start talking about faith is openness, right? Like, how do you just stay open and curious? Um, and I think curiosity doesn't have the weight of fear attached to it. I think when curiosity starts to mix with the color of fear, then you start feeling anxious in some way. And now we're like talking about just like bunches of different emotions. But something you said about, well, what's functional? Like, well, what works? Like, I remember having discussions with, people like kind of when I was in my mid 20s about just like magic and um, trying to see the world through the eyes of like a child again. I think children have a natural tendency to move towards faith because it to them it doesn't they don't give a shit if it's real or not. It's what's working for them that is important. And I think that it would behoove us to try and orient ourselves in such a way that it's like, well, like, is it really useful to know about different hormones that allow people to feel this or feel that, or don't feel this or don't feel that, or whatever? Like, yeah, it could probably be useful in certain cases, but at the end of the day, it's like, is it functional? Does that strengthen our relationships with each other? Does that allow us to, be more imaginative, be more artistic in our lives? And so I think a question that we might ask ourselves is, what would change if you stopped waiting for certainty before living? I think a lot of the times I'm a planner, right? Like when I travel, there's a lot of fear and anxiousness revolved around travel. And maybe you probably can relate to this, Brom, but it's like, oh no, I gotta get to the train station because this is the time it leaves, and if I don't make the train, then how can I get there? And all of these things start to kind of color our reality, and it colors it in a way that's not functional, right? It's not useful. And so moving out into the world with the comfortability of uncertainty can be more helpful in some way. And it might not be helpful for everybody, but it's a cool practice to maybe incorporate into your life. And shit, you can just do that with grocery shopping, right? Like instead of making a list, just go to the grocery store, and just kind of intuitively shop, right? That can be a really micro baby step into moving in the direction of life with the comfortability of uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned the concept of travel because it's such a great one, to just show you what kind of what's real for you. Like I did years of like I'm really not a traveler. I live in countries and then travels like kind of mostly to get me in between places. But I remember just deeply loving not checking, not knowing, and just going. And the just ancient tradition, let's say in Tibetan Buddhism, that you just go on a pilgrimage. You just
Mm-hmm.
you just leave from the mountains or you leave to the mountains and you just go and you'll find water where you find water and you'll go hungry when you go hungry. And I'm not on that level by any stretch, but having that kind of mountain of a like inspiration to me, like, okay, I can take this day and just say, right, this is where I'm gonna end up.
Mm,
Let's see how I get there.
mm,
Is a fun one just to open yourself up to adventure. And like you say, there's little things we can be doing in our daily life. We don't have to pause anything to just say, like, all right, you know what? This day off that I have, I'm just gonna head out of my house. I'm gonna follow my feet, or I'm
mm,
gonna get here somehow, and I don't know how. Or like there's this director I like who's Chilean. Um, his name is Jodorowsky, and he had this poet friend when he was a teenager. One day, they just decided, all right, we're gonna cross all of Buenos Aires in a straight line. And if there's someone's house there, we'll knock on the door and explain, sorry, we're two poets. We're doing this thing. It's a little unusual. Can we go through your house? We need to cross it in a straight line. And a car or they walk over the car. And like they just did that for like hours and people were like, that's very weird, but okay. And it brought some life into
mm,
everyone's experience. I'm not
mm.
suggesting anything on that level either, but just kind of they're tiny little things, or just driving a different way home. Uh, and
Mm,
using your non-dominant hand to brush your teeth, or little
mhm,
things to just flip us back into the world. Because I think ultimately what fear is like, it pauses the feeling of being alive, being joyful.
mhm.
I don't often associate joy and fear together. They seem to kind of negate each other, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, little ways that we can kind of bring more joy into our life. That's another strategy. Instead of like maybe running from fear or turning away from fear, instead, if we turn towards joy, if we turn towards
Mm,
something that we'd want to fill ourselves up with instead, sometimes that can be a little nifty trick that just by its presence, like the light takes the dark, instead of how do I get rid
mm,
of the dark, how do I bring in the light? Um,
mhm.
yeah, it's interesting, all these little flips we can do to lessen the
Yeah.
fear experience.
I love what you said about like bringing more life into other people. And it kind of got me thinking like, in a way, when we are in the dimension of fear, we almost live like an artificial version of life, or it's like oh, now we're on in the fear simulator, or now we're on just like, if we're thinking about consciousness or our mind as like different channels on a TV, right? Like now we're on the fear channel, and every single aspect of our life is through lens of fear, and it creates almost like a fake version of life. Like you could be at an amusement park, and if you felt joy or fear, they could be completely different experiences, right? Like being at an amusement park with fear is probably one of the scariest places that you could be, if you're like truly sitting in fear. Or you could feel joy, and it's like just a completely different aspect of reality. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and also this concept of like, how can I put it? The fear is connected to a kind of a truth. Let's say a lot of the fears are fear that one thing is going to put me into separation from something else. So, for example, um, anytime that we need to kind of speak a truth to somebody, that could cause distance. That could cause, oh, you think a relationship. I mean, my goodness. Words have so much power. They have so much power. And what we say now can echo in someone else's mind for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like on the one hand, the fear is acknowledging the power of a thing, like a truth of a moment that we kind of keep to ourselves because we're worried it might cause separation, cause distance,
Mm,
cause something like that. And then we really end up, instead of realizing, okay, this is a normal, natural situation, we enjoy our life less because, like, I had someone who told me once, that they had this like such a thing against letting it be known, oh, hey, you know what? I actually have to go to the bathroom for a moment. Like they would stay in
mm,
conversations to the point where the only thing they're thinking about is like, man, my bladder is going to explode. And yet you're just like, you're so cut off from life in that, kind of
mm,
fear. I wonder too if that could be like a little kind of an exercise of, what are we making not okay? What part,
mm,
I mean, we have a biology that has certain basic facts that why on earth do we have like all this anxiety about something that's so natural, to just
mm,
one banal example. Um, and like I was saying, kind of living in these different contexts where, a lot of times I'm speaking a different language, so there's a lot of filters go away too. And then you realize, like I was at this permaculture farm in Morocco once, and there was this young woman from Greece. And I remember she taught me such a lesson in silence. What she would do, I would be like gardening or something, and she would just come up with, there's nobody around. I'm just in silence in my thoughts. She would show up and just be there. And she wouldn't say anything at all. And the first time it freaked me out. Whoa, oh, hey. And then, and she just smiled at me. And I was like, oh, hey, what's going on? And then she would take her time about it, because what's the rush? What is the rush?
mm,
Why do we need to get the words out so fast? You're in the middle of a farm, hot sun's baking down, there's no one around, it's just you and someone else. Well, you choose how you express, and she chose to stay in
mm.
silence for quite a while. Finally, she smiles at me and she says, lunch is ready. Oh, okay. Let's go have some lunch. But it taught me a lesson. I reflected on that. I thought, okay, why do I have this anxiety? Person appears, I'm in my thoughts. Oh, it startles me. Why does it startle me? Well,
Mm,
okay, I was kind of in another world. And it's,
mm,
in a way, we're all in another world and we're all on top of each other all the time. So it's harder for us to see it. But if we ever do isolate ourselves completely, it's a bizarre thing interacting with another person when you don't have any role at all,
mm,
you know?
mhm.
And always have some kind of a role, okay, but you know what I mean? We can lessen the role. And so the next time she showed up, I was ready. And she showed up and she didn't say anything, she just smiled. And I wasn't startled and I didn't, have any words that needed to come out. I just smiled. What's the problem? Why do we
Mhm.
need to go into
Mhm.
words, 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 A lot of times the words hide the anxiety behind them. There's an
Mhm.
Indian saying we use our words to hide what's true and real in our mind. And it's interesting if you've ever done these exercises where you just sit face to face with somebody and to just say truth and then the other person just say, I have heard you. And you just say a truth. I have heard you. You know, and it's a wild exercise and we never do it. And it seems like kind of living completely on your head. But if you notice yourself rushing, 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 this I think for me is a central point. If I sometimes would wander and meander, but I just put underlines under this thing I'm trying to say. I notice this all around the world. There is a rushing, rushing, rushing constantly towards what we don't even know, why we're not sure. But I think it's why there's a general culture of interrupting one another, which is why I think this space is so powerful because we have it kind of as our bedrock that we do not interrupt each other. That we're so used to being cut off. We have this anxiety. I really want to get the thing out. I don't think I'm even going to get it out. Unconsciously, we're
Mm,
not thinking it because that's just our experience. A lot of times we have not been heard out in years, maybe. And we forget even while we're talking. And then the other piece, I think, which I notice in myself, is that there's a want to jump in to show someone, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you're going to say. Like, I've listened, like, I heard it. Yeah, I'm with you. But really, what we do is we disconnect, and that person feels cut
mm,
off, and and it's also, we have this anxiety of staying in silence. People are talking around us. If we're not talking, then our thoughts start to creep in, and then there's the
mhm,
anxiety of like the mind is a creepy place, it's an ugly place, it's a beautiful place, it's everything, but it uh is also the dark. There's a lot of
mm.
dark in the human mind. And when other people are talking, we sometimes just drift in our own mind. And then it's like, how do I get out of here? Let me just interrupt, you know? So, yeah, some reflections there. And yeah, so for you, like, what do you think is, how do you see like the United States culture today? What do you think of what we're talking now could be like kind of helpful to like ground in what people are dealing with in the current day, bringing it back kind of to this cultural moment?
Hmm. Hmm. Ooh, there's so much there. um, well, I think that, you what you were speaking to was really making me think of how fear makes transparency opaque, and fear takes away from authenticity in some form or fashion. And I think that, especially kind of in the climate, um, in the United States right now, is we, and this is by design, are held in a state of fear where we are no longer open to expressing authentically or communicating in a transparent way. And I think that this creates separateness. And I think that this is, without getting too political, it's by design. And I think that if we disassociate from fear and become curious and maybe sprinkle in a little bit of faith in there in the way that we've defined it since, through openness, through trust, and we couple that with curiosity, well, what are we afraid of then? You know, Eh, are we now curious to engage more as a community with our neighbors? Are we more curious now to step out of our houses with, like you say, feet on the ground, love in my heart? That's, I love that. I keep that mantra really alive for me all the time. And you taught me that one, Brahm. And that's really what it is. Like, let's utilize um, the incredible capacity of the mind as a tool to generate um, more openness, to try and maybe not dispel fear. Well, actually, I like that word, dispel, because it is a spell, right? It's a spell, an incantation that we have been caught up in, and I think it is very very rampant now here in the United States. Um, and it's taken away from authentically connecting with each other through an open, curious, loving expression, um, and to kind of step out into the world with meta, with this kind of open, loving curiosity, is really important because it takes away the separateness and this isolation and this feeling of being small. And we can kind of move towards more courage. I think that that word, actually, we haven't really expressed it in a way. Fear, when we transmute it and we exalt fear, it turns into courage, right? And I think that that is a really cool observation, and just a practice that we can kind of inherit, is that utilization, that alchemical transmutation of fear into courage, and then utilizing it to create more community and love and appreciation for one another, even if we have different opinions, and that's fine too. The world would suck if we all believed the same thing. Um, but not being afraid of someone else's opinion is really the heart of it, I think.
Yeah, I like what you said about dispelling fear
Yeah.
and you know, this really, really pervasive um, kind of tactic of population control,
Mm.
social engineering, of just building a whole reality based on having people be afraid.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. And I think, and then the narratives, any kind of a political narrative, in a way people hold on to it from a fear, it's an identity. And I
Mm.
think the more whatever actions that people want to take, um, they're there. I mean, the consequences are the consequences. But I think at the end of the day, the more of that we can put aside, the more that it's I see it kind of like they're like shields. It's like when someone just talks to me about politics, the impression I get is this person it has like some kind of a fear or anxiety about saying something real to
Mm.
me. It's like it's just static, you know? Whereas, if you root your conversation and you ground it in the experience of the moment, we're out at a picnic, we've never met before. Oh, how did you meet the host of this place? Or how did the more we can just talk person to person as the storytellers that we are, without the artifice of, a political narrative, or without the shield of this TV show or that TV show or something that's not rooted in our own life, and leading with curiosity and questions and realizing, like you say, if we all had the same opinion, how boring the world would be. I love it when people have a different opinion. That's wonderful. And just keying into like curiosity about how they see the world and about how they've experienced things, and like you say, going back to that key point of childhood and the magic and the wisdom of seeing with the child's eyes. I was just visiting my family in Florence, and they were telling me about my 3-year-old, my cousin, when he was 3 years old, going to the cinema for the first time and standing up on the chair with wonder and awe in his eyes at this huge television screen and saying, "Wow, how beautiful the cinema," you know? And then the eyes of a child are just, what a wonderful thing humans have done for other humans to make this
Mm.
experience that I, 3-year-old, get to have. Whoa, what a magical world. If we can bring more of that into the picture, and especially if we're less attached to, I need to convince someone else. I think a lot of the time, social interactions are challenging for us because we have an agenda. I
Hmm.
want the person to understand this. This is their what? Come on, what is that? Like what? You know, you have your valleys and mountains of human experience. They have their, mountains and valleys of human experience. Is that not interesting? Is that not worth finding common ground together? As a not
Yeah.
trying to change your mind, I'm just trying to know your mind a bit and just, and inviting people back to the best parts of childhood, I think is one of the strongest things that we can do with safe, fun, lighthearted, kind-hearted, curious questions and genuine interest. Everybody is endlessly fascinating when you can actually get to them. If we can put down the walls a little bit, we are no longer, starving to death for connection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating, I think, what we come back to these two kind of different kind of modes of perception. One is the knowledge mode and one is the faith mode. And it can be difficult to express loving kindness when there's too much knowledge of something, because that kind of clouds the opinion that we have of the thing that we're kind of um, digesting. And so, like, if we're speaking to someone and they have a different opinion than us, and we have knowledge of that opinion, whether it's positive or negative, we aren't authentically listening to the person. We're casting our knowledge onto the person. And so it's almost like, well, if we try and orient our perception with faith, then that allows loving kindness, curiosity, trust, openness, joy. It allows more of a space for that to flourish a little more. Because we're out of our own way. Like our mind, our knowledge of any one thing isn't the forefront of the subject that we're trying to observe or we're trying to connect with. And so I think that these topics are just so fascinating and so cool. It opens up so much room for discussion, and at the forefront, it's like having more of a faith-based perception invites us to have more joy in our life just because we're more open and curious rather than contracted with knowledge, and through that knowledge we come up with hundreds and millions of different fears that are aligned with the knowledge of the thing that we have.
Yeah, I love that image you share of like casting our net of knowledge on the person and just like, yeah, even if just we're quiet about it, oh no, it didn't happen like that, or no, out loud, da da da. But at the same time, what do we really know anyway? If long ago people thought the Earth was the center of the solar system, and now we think the sun is the center, and in the future we realize it's all just a hologram. What the hell does it matter on your dying day that you were right or you were kind, And if you
Mm,
weren't even right to begin with, do you even know? Like, what is it gaining you? Or to say, okay, this person through their work to hear between the lines. All right, this person is trying to navigate a world which seems too much to them, and the way they kind of make their way is by X, Y, Z kind of imposed certainty. And yeah, I guess kind of maybe a closing point for me is like, how do we want to be in the world? How do we want to be with each other? and how do we want to be in relation to fear and
Hmm.
to faith. And that's not to say that we can necessarily have a life with no fear. In fact, I think it's more valiant, and to use your word, courageous, to see the fear, acknowledge the fear, and to make steps towards what our life is ultimately calling us to, regardless that there's a fear present or not, and navigating and maybe even, dare I say it, making friends with the fear. Not that you capitulate to
Hmm.
it, but you say, I'm not afraid of fear. I can recognize it. I can see you kind of as the darker sibling to, joy and light and love and so on. And by acknowledging it and not pushing it away, it has less of a chance to sneak up on us because, all right, we invited in. All right, what are the fears? All right, let's see. Let's make a list. I'm afraid of this. All right, now I can deal with it. Now I can bring some light to it. But I think, yeah, maybe sometimes we are afraid of fear itself, and that
Yeah.
keeps things in the dark that we can only deal with when we bring them to the light.
Hmm. Hmm. That's beautiful. I think, like, just to mirror that, some closing thoughts are, if fear is a safety mechanism, I think it's important to ask yourself, what am I trying to protect? If there is a sense of contraction and I'm moving away from curiosity or courage, is is that worth sacrificing for whatever you're trying to protect? Because virtues and ideals are really important, but like you said, Brahm, when the heart's on the scale and the feather's on the other side, what's the most important thing, right? Like, what is it? What's the value here? If we're really thinking about life with a capital L, what's the most valuable thing for us? And it's all different. We all come up with different answers for that. Um, but I think it's a practice is, go out in your day and make some choices without any certainty, to try and practice and step into a more faith-based perception. Um, and maybe have a conversation that you've been avoiding, or maybe go, like, test yourself, just put yourself out there, to try and move through fear with courage, to open yourself up with a little bit more curiosity.
Wonderful. Cody, thank you so much. This has been such a beautiful dialogue, and thanks everyone for listening and tuning in. And yeah, we hope there have been some things that have sparked off some ideas in you, some feelings, and maybe we can shine our own little light a little brighter in our corner of the dark, and bring a little bit more joy into our own experiences.
Love it. Yeah, thank you, Brahm. It was a really awesome opportunity to chat about some of these topics. I hope everyone really enjoyed it.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks. Yeah, bye.